Make sure that your leadership is on board. Make sure that your teams understand what you're doing, why you're doing it. Train them, get them enabled, and then go pick the platform that is going to take you from this, the task management or the entry level automation to the whole agentic automation piece.
Welcome to the EIQ Waves podcast, where we explore what it truly takes to scale automation across the enterprise responsibly and intelligently. In each episode, we go beyond the buzzwords to bring you grounded insights from the leaders who are actively building, governing, and shaping the future of AI and automation in the real world. On the very first episode today, we have Sameet Gupte, CEO and co-founder of EvoluteIQ, the company at the forefront of enterprise automation innovation.
So Sameet, without further ado, welcome to this conversation and to the very first episode of the EvoluteIQ podcast.
Thank you, Soundarya. It's a pleasure to be here.
Before we get into the crux of our conversation, I do want to take a step back and frame this from a person leading it, such as yourself, Sameet. For those who may not really know you yet, how do you define yourself beyond the title of a CEO, and what has shaped your perspective on automation and enterprise transformation?
I think of myself first and foremost as a builder. I mean, just like my other co-founders, right? Someone who has spent maybe over 2 decades sitting at the intersection of technology and business complexity, and being frustrated enough by the gap between the two to want to close it. I started my career back in financial services technology at a time when digital transformation wasn't even a phrase, actually. I mean, you just saw large enterprises struggling to make their systems talk to each other, struggling to scale operations without, having linear headcount. And you asked yourself, why is something so simple so hard? And that frustration is what eventually led to Evolute IQ, right? Because what really shaped my perspective more than technology or trend or market thesis was watching how enterprises actually work, not how org charts say they work, right? I mean, for me, it was how do great companies or good companies consistently deliver the outcomes, right? What is it that they do? So their thought was, there are two, three things, right? One is obviously the people, the talent. The second is the culture. And then the third is, the process, right? That's how they actually work. The workarounds that people actually build, the spreadsheets that run mission critical processes, the institutional knowledge that actually lives in, people's head and then disappears when they leave, right? That's the reality of enterprise operations. And, any platform that doesn't acknowledge that reality will fail no matter how sophisticated, the technology that you build. So that was what sort of inspired me to build Evolute IQ with my partners. So when I think about automation and transformation, I think about it from the ground up, from the process, from the people doing the work, from exceptions that don't fit any rule. Sorry, that humility about operational complexity is, what I think differentiates the builders from the last ones who build elegant solutions to problems. So co-founding Evolute IQ with an exceptional team, has been the fullest expression of that perspective, right? The perspective of, you know, automating the process, building a technology that underpins, what the gaps are, underpins what, needs to be done for the process to be completely automated. A belief that you can build something that is genuinely enterprise grade, genuinely intelligent, practical, and at the same time something that works, right? I mean, those things don't have to be in tension, and that's sort of, what we set out to prove.
So, if I could delve a little deeper into that, if someone were to ask you in one line the core purpose of Evolute IQ for an enterprise, how would you word that?
I'll try to answer this in two ways, right? I mean, at the deepest level, Evolute IQ exists to answer just one question. Why should a complexity in an organization be the ceiling, right? Every large enterprise we have ever worked with has the same hidden tax on their operations, the tax of complexity. The thing that defines every organization is a processes that span dozens of systems, thousands of exceptions, layers of human intervention that exist not because humans add value at every step, but because the technology was never intelligent enough to handle what humans handle naturally, right? The tax compounds over time, then it slows the decision making, it delays customers. uh, the worst thing it does, it actually burns out good people along the way that shouldn't require their judgment, right? What Evolute IQ is fundamentally trying to change is that equation. We believe enterprises should be able to operate at the speed of their ambition, okay, not at the speed of their constrained processes. And to do that, then you need automation that just doesn't execute the predictable and the obvious and the repetitive, but navigates the unpredictable, right? That's not a feature, that's philosophy. It's baked into everything we build, right? How do we make a technology that can think for itself, build by itself, learn by itself, and solve the complex problems by making those decisions, right? But there's a second dimension to our purpose, right? As I said, I'll try and answer this in two ways. And that I care about just as deeply as it's about the people, right? There is an enormous amount of human potential being consumed by work that machines shouldn't be doing, actually, right? The biggest thing that we have built is, these hordes and armies of people actually genuinely wasting time on things that they shouldn't be doing. Repetitive decisions, routine exceptions, low judgment interventions. And it's easy to intervene when there are 4 or 5 exceptions. You think about it when you do it for a large enterprise across 60, 70 countries. I mean, that's crazy, right? I mean, it's just absolutely bad for any organization to do that. And so when you actually do that, right, when you free people from that, something remarkable happens. One, the people don't become redundant, they actually become more valuable. I mean, the biggest issue everybody has today is, oh, AI is going to take my job. No, they're not. Actually, they're going to put it at a level where you're genuinely using your intellect and what your skills are, right, and sort of upskill. They then focus on what I believe are relationships, on innovation, good judgment calls that genuinely require a human being. And we have seen it repeatedly across our clients, in healthcare, in banking, in insurance. When the operational burden lifts, the people underneath that process or who are involved with it actually rise and become more productive employees, right? So the core purpose isn't really about technology. I mean, we are a technology company, but it's not about technology. It's about unlocking what enterprises and the people inside them are actually capable of doing when complexity stops being the constraint. That's the change we are trying to do as Evolute IQ.
Agentic automation is a phrase that people just throw around, but what do you think makes something agentic versus just RPA plus AI?
Best part about being a CEO is you don't have to complicate things, right? And so very simply put, agentic automation, to me, is the shift from automating tasks to automating outcomes, right? I mean, traditional automation says, follow these steps, right? Do A, B, C, and it's very predictable. Agentic automation, on the contrary, says, hey, here's the goal, figure it out, adapt as you go, and tell me when it is done, right? That's sort of the biggest difference. For a CIO, that means dramatically, having a lesser brittle infrastructure, right? For a CEO, it means that processes don't break every time. And every time there is an exception that walks in the door, you don't have to treat it, right? At Evolute IQ, we think about it as giving enterprises a genuinely true digital workforce that's not just executing, but it is deciding for itself, it self corrects, it learns. And so that's the fundamental shift in the model between, traditional automation and agentic automation.
So, if I were to ask you, in terms of if you had to be specific, what would you say are the core building blocks that a leader should look for?
4 building blocks that I would like leaders to focus on, right? I mean, the first one is process intelligence. I mean, every platform that they're looking for must understand what's happening in a process. It should not just be about executing, but genuinely understanding what's happening in the process. The second is, action execution, right? The ability to act across any system. Now, whether it's an ERP or a legacy database, API, or any homegrown system that's built, right? Uh, the third would be, adaptive decision making. So powered by Gen AI and large language models, so that the systems can handle exceptions intelligently rather than failing over and needing human intervention, right? And the fourth and the last one, which I think is the biggest one, actually, is governance observability, right? I mean, because autonomy without transparency is not something any enterprise can tolerate or any CFO can underwrite, because that's massive liability, right? I mean, if you're evaluating a platform and it can't show you why it made a decision, I would say walk away. Because at EvoluteIQ, we have made, bias detection, explainability, transparent AI models very, very core to the platform. I mean, this is the crux and the core of what we have built. I mean, it's not an optional add-on.
When you're talking about autonomy and these kind of delegating tasks to agentic systems, etc., there is always this fear of, will this get out of our control? Do we need a human in the loop? How do we place guardrails to make this practical and make this safe? So, what do you think are those markers that we need to put in place so that innovation can happen without impacting negatively?
The fear is legitimate, okay? And frankly, it should be. Autonomous systems in banking, insurance, healthcare, they need guardrails by design, and it cannot be an afterthought. The way we approach it is through what I call, bounded autonomy, or responsible autonomy. You define the goal conditions, you create the exception thresholds, the escalation paths in plain language, and then let the agents operate with those boundaries. Think of it like a new employee joining an organization, right? You give them authority to act, but you also define the limits of that authority, right, before they start. They know what they can make a call on, what they cannot, right? Beyond that, every decision the system makes needs to be auditable, right? In regulated industries, especially, our clients require full explainability of trials. I mean, especially in financial services, healthcare, it's not just the logs of what happened, but the reasoning chain that got there. I mean, especially think of things like denials management in a claims process, right? Why did you deny that claim? Unless there is a justification of how you went about making the decision, how you parsed that, that there was no gender bias or race bias, or there was no discrimination of any sort, that needs to be very, very transparent, not just the logs, but an entire thinking process, right? So autonomy is safe when it is transparent, bounded, and auditable. And that's the standard we hold ourselves to when we deploy Evolute IQ, or when we build anything to enhance the platform.
Some very critical points you made there, Sameet. Absolutely. Guardrails are important, and especially in sectors where a lot of the economy has placed its weight on. So, I would like to shift the conversation just a little bit and talk about RPA. It's worked in the past, so why isn't it enough? So, my question is, in your view, what do you think RPA genuinely solves for an enterprise?
If you found this conversation valuable, don't forget to leave a comment. Be sure to follow the EIQ Waves podcast. Share it with your colleagues and peers. Don't forget to join us as we continue exploring the future of automation, one brand new conversation at a time. Thanks for tuning in.